The clock on the wall showed 9:15 a.m. when Kendrick Robinson stood before the judge. He was a federal prosecutor, known for his sharp mind and discipline, but he was in court for a personal reason, to fight a mistaken property tax bill on the small house his grandmother had left him. That home was more than just a building, it was where he'd learned right from wrong. He was late because he'd been handling an urgent motion for a federal human trafficking case. Now, he was facing Judge Whitman's cold, angry stare. "You're late, Mr. Robinson," the judge's voice sliced through the room. "Do you think this court's time is less valuable than yours?" In a municipal courtroom in Greenville, South Carolina, Judge Charles Whitman thought he was in complete control. Known for his harsh rulings and an even harsher attitude, he commanded a certain kind of fear-based respect. But on this particular day, his usual display of bias went terribly wrong. In front of a room full of people, Judge Whitman decided to humiliate a black man for being a few minutes late to court. What the judge didn't know was that the man standing calmly before him wasn't just any citizen. He was a federal prosecutor, and he was about to expose the judge's corrupt little kingdom. This wasn't just a simple fine, it was the beginning of the end for a deeply flawed system. Despite the judge's instant hostility, Kendrick Robinson was the definition of professional. He'd only lived in Greenville for about a year, having moved for his demanding job. He was a man who believed in facts, evidence, and the idea that justice is supposed to be blind. But it was clear that in Judge Whitman's court, justice was looking directly at the color of his skin. Just minutes earlier, Kendrick had watched a white man in a suit walk in even later than him. The judge didn't say a word. Then, a young woman with a coffee-stained shirt wandered in late, and again, the judge didn't react. Kendrick saw it all but stayed quiet, focused on the file in his hand that proved the city's tax bill was wrong. "Your Honor, I apologize," Kendrick said, his voice completely steady. "I was attending to urgent federal matters." Judge Whitman just scoffed. He wasn't interested in an apology. "Excuses don't work in my courtroom," the judge snapped. "This court runs on order and respect. Maybe you should reevaluate your priorities." The tension in the room got thick. People started shifting in their seats. Kendrick could feel everyone watching him, but he kept his face a mask of calm. He'd met men like Judge Whitman before, men who feed on getting a reaction. Kendrick wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. He tried to get things back on track. "Your Honor, I understand. If I may, I'd like to present my case regarding the property tax." But Judge Whitman cut him off. "We'll get to that," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "First, we have to deal with your contempt for these proceedings. Being late undermines this court." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "I'm fining you $750. A quiet gasp went through the courtroom. A $750 fine for being a few minutes late. It was a ridiculous amount. It wasn't about justice, it was about humiliation. It was a pure power play. Kendrick's jaw tightened, but when he spoke, his voice was still calm. "Your Honor, with all due respect, that seems excessive. May I request a payment plan?" A cruel little smile appeared on Judge Whitman's face. "This isn't a charity, Mr. Robinson. The fine is due today." It was a known, though unproven, tactic of his to deny payment plans to minority defendants. And that was the moment it all became clear. It wasn't just about the money. It was about being publicly belittled and getting a punishment that didn't fit the crime. It was about the undeniable double standard he had just witnessed. Kendrick Robinson, a man who fought for the law, was now being targeted by a system twisted by one man's prejudice. As he stood there, a decision formed in his mind. He would pay the fine. But this was far from over. In fact, it was just the beginning. Kendrick stood there in the stretching silence, every eye in the room fixed on him. Everyone was waiting for him to argue, to yell, to show the anger Judge Whitman was so obviously trying to provoke. The judge leaned back, a smug look on his face. He thought he'd won. He'd put another black man, who he figured was a little too full of himself, back in his place. But the explosion never came. Instead, Kendrick took a slow, deliberate breath. His posture, which had been respectful, suddenly radiated authority. He reached into his coat pocket, not for a wallet, but for his professional credentials. His movements were slow, precise, and impossible to look away from. He looked Judge Whitman directly in the eye. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it seemed to fill the entire room with a power he had been holding back. "Your Honor," he started, the respectful title now loaded with irony. "I will pay this unjust fine. It will be paid in full, today, just like you demanded." He paused, letting that hang in the air. The judge's smirk twitched, a little confused by the lack of a fight. Then Kendrick's tone shifted. He was no longer a defendant. "But before I do, I think it's my professional duty to let you know exactly who you just tried to humiliate in public." He calmly placed his leather credential case on the table and flipped it open. The gold seal of the United States Department of Justice gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "My name is Kendrick Robinson," he said, his voice crystal clear. "I am an assistant United States attorney for the District of South Carolina. The reason I was late to your court this morning is because I was filing a motion to freeze the assets of a multi-state human trafficking ring. That was the urgent federal matter." Silence. Total, shocking silence. The color drained from Judge Whitman's face. His jaw went slack. His arrogance evaporated into pure, panicked shock. The court clerk stopped typing and stared, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and something that looked a lot like vindication. The man Judge Whitman had tried to make an example of was a federal prosecutor. He was part of the very system the judge was supposed to serve, but at a level that could bring his world crashing down. Kendrick calmly closed his credential case. "As an officer of the federal court, I take judicial integrity very seriously. And I have to say, Your Honor, what I saw and experienced here today raises serious questions about the fair administration of justice in Greenville." He didn't have to raise his voice. He didn't have to make a threat. The reveal was the threat. Judge Whitman, a man who had ruled his little kingdom without consequence for years, was now speechless, staring at the man who was no longer a defendant, but a symbol of a reckoning to come. The courtroom descended into a kind of quiet chaos. Judge Whitman, pale and visibly shaken, mumbled a dismissal of the case, trying to undo the last 5 minutes. But it was too late. In the gallery was a law student observing proceedings for a class. Horrified but inspired, she posted a detailed account of the entire exchange on social media, and it went viral almost instantly. The story of the arrogant judge and the dignified federal prosecutor was just too explosive. Hashtags like #Justice for Greenville started trending everywhere. The student's post was just the beginning. Soon, a flood of other people came forward with their own stories of suffering under Judge Whitman's biased rulings. Lawyers and former defendants felt brave enough to finally speak out. A clear, disturbing pattern emerged, and with so much public pressure, the local Judicial Review Commission had no choice but to launch a formal investigation. The key witness turned out to be a court clerk, Mrs. Thompson. For years, she had been quietly documenting the judge's discriminatory behavior in a small notebook, a secret ledger of dates, cases, and biased actions. She handed that diary over to investigators, and it was a bombshell. Her notes, combined with an official audit, confirmed what people had been whispering for years. Black defendants in Whitman's court were fined, on average, 3 times more than white defendants for the same minor infractions. Requests for payment plans were almost always denied to minorities while being regularly granted to white defendants. As the investigation got deeper, activists organized rallies outside the courthouse. News outlets picked up the story, and Judge Whitman became a national symbol of how racism can rot the justice system from the inside. Throughout it all, Kendrick Robinson remained a figure of quiet strength. He turned down TV interviews, instead working directly with the Judicial Review Commission. He wasn't interested in personal revenge, he wanted to make sure what happened to him, and to so many others, would never happen again. Facing irrefutable evidence from the clerk's ledger, dozens of testimonies, and the watchful eye of a federal prosecutor, Judge Whitman's career was over. He resigned in disgrace before the commission could even release its final report. But the story didn't end there. The scandal forced the city of Greenville to confront the deep-seated problems in its courts. A new judicial oversight committee was created. Mandatory, ongoing implicit bias training was required for all court staff. The system, once protected by one man's arrogance, was finally forced to start changing. The showdown in that Greenville courtroom started with one man's prejudice, but it ended with an entire community fighting back. Kendrick Robinson became a symbol of integrity and the power of standing firm in the face of injustice. He reminded a whole city that nobody is above the law and that the fight for real justice requires a calm, unwavering resolve. His stand was like a single stone tossed into a stagnant pond, but it created waves of change, proving that one person's refusal to back down can make all the difference. Stories like this are a powerful reminder that the fight for justice and equality is happening every single day. If you believe these stories matter and want to help us bring more of them to light, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching.